Chapter 12, People. For the life of me, I can't understand why Giran would call me back to the fatherland on the eve of our showdown with the Federation. In the vast hall of the Zeon War Council, Vice Admiral Dozl Zabi deliberately blurted out the words loud enough so that his father, Sovereign Degwin, seated on his throne, could easily hear them. Dozl's elder brother, Giran, the Supreme Commander chairing the council, did not react at all, and merely continued to lord it over those in attendance. He was flanked by both Dozl and his sister, Rear Admiral Kycilia, and a bevy of ranking Zeon officers under Zabi family control. Technically, a civilian government ruled Zeon, but even the layout of the room reflected a bargain struck between image and reality. Prime Minister Darshia Baharo, along with several ministers under his influence, was one of the few civilians to rise to power through the ranks of the bureaucracy and was thus supposed to have been given the seat of honor, near Sovereign Degwin. But since the Zabi family depended on the military, he was seated the farthest away. 1/3 of his cabinet ministers were controlled by the Zabi family. Degwin, nominally an observer, had already been reduced to a puppet. True power lay in the hands of Supreme Commander Giran Zabi. An occasional reluctance to conform had created a suspicion in some quarters that Prime Minister Darshia harbored a desire to depose Supreme Commander Giran and restore Degwin to power. Giran was fully aware of the rumor, yet was prepared to tolerate it. He was accustomed to scheming minds and knew that intrigues were a normal part of human nature. As long as they were not an overt threat, he knew that there was no use trying to suppress them completely, that to do so would only be counterproductive. As long as Darshia was restrained, therefore, he would not take action against the man. All he had to do, he believed, was tighten the reins of control and make him subtly aware of the futility of his scheming. That was the type of man Giran was. He would let his brother Dozl raise as much fuss as he wanted. As long as there was no major change in the overall picture, he knew his position was secure. He could trust his sister Kycilia to keep the rest of the situation under control. Vice Admiral Dozl, Kycilia said, replying to her brother's earlier comment, if, as we suspect, the Federation forces have detected what we are up to, then I respectfully submit that there is only one issue that must be urgently addressed today, and that is the state of progress on our system project. We must keep our perspective. Giran noted that, as he had hoped, Kycilia was working to keep Dozl in line. Kycilia glanced at Giran after her statement, and then turned to Prime Minister Darshia. We need you to give us an overview of the system project as proposed by the Supreme Commander. Minimum, and to do this, we must bring the war to its earliest possible conclusion. We therefore have resolved to endorse the system project. The Prime Minister's announcement was important, as without a national consensus, the project could never be completed. The system required not only a massive budget, but also the evacuation of over 3 million people from an older existing colony and the cooperation of a wide variety of industries. Dozl sniffed. What do we need a cabinet resolution for? Hold your tongue, brother, Kycilia retorted, again restraining Dozl just as Giran had hoped. Darshia raised his voice another notch and continued. Accordingly, given the nature of this measure, we wish to propose that it be seriously discussed by all parties in attendance today and then, in order to obtain the final authorization of His Excellency the Sovereign Degwin, that it be submitted for formal approval. 2 or 3 questions then followed, all of which revolved around the prospects of total victory. There was no need to debate anything else. Unbeknown to most civilians present, the project was already well underway, and the evacuation of the number 3 Zeon colony cylinder, Mahar, was proceeding under the supervision of a high-ranking Zeon officer. The council fell silent for several minutes. All present sensed the tightening web of Giran's total control, but distracted by all the attention to a single grandiose strategy or by the fate of this or that Zeon warship, few truly realized that the Zeon nation had begun to move in a direction of its own. It was, needless to say, a direction totally different from what they suspected. Prime Minister Darshia took the cabinet's written proposal, placed it in a black leather file with the Principality of Zeon seal, and walked toward Degwin. No one in the hall spoke. Giran kept staring at the long tabletop in front on him, and his face took on an ashen hue. Darshia ascended the 3 steps in front of Degwin's throne, placed the file on a stand next to it, and stiffly slid it toward the sovereign. And then he heard words that made him doubt his own ears. "My eldest son is a blot on my honor," Degwin whispered. "Do with him as you please." The sovereign had never uttered such a thing before, even behind closed doors. Perhaps he's becoming senile, Darshia thought for a second. He stared at Degwin's spectacles, trying to fathom the expression in the eyes behind them. But the man already reached out for a pen to sign the document, and his face was turned away. Darshia hoped the words he had heard were a figment of his imagination. He was a civilian with precious few connections in the military elite. His real role in the government was to present a civilian face to the Zeon people. Like Degwin, he was really only a puppet, and what could a conspiracy between 2 puppets possibly accomplish? Degwin put down his pen, smiled, and whispered words unrelated to his expression. "It's Kycilia, isn't it?" What did he mean? Darshia thought. Was he trying to say that he should use Kycilia to crush Giran? As far as Darshia was concerned, Kycilia was just as formidable a threat as Giran. "Thank you, Your Excellency," he nonetheless replied, returning Degwin's smile. Then he turned around and walked over toward Giran. When viewed from behind in his military uniform, Giran's neck looked as thick as a log, invulnerable to even the blade of a beam saber. Darshia opened the file and showed Giran his father's signature. "Well done, Darshia," Giran said. He normally looked at people with a cold, piercing expression, but his mouth was now formed into a thin smile. "Thank you, sir," Darshia answered. Then he turned to either side, showed the same file to Dozel and Kycilia, and after receiving their acknowledgement returned to his own seat, the lowest in the hierarchy. "Been authorized, we have gained the equivalent strength of between 5 and 10 new divisions. I am proud to say frankly that our decision has altered the odds of victory in our favor. It is an accomplishment that every citizen of Zeon should take pride in, for the system project is a crystallization of all our labor and sweat. The system strategy will henceforth be the centerpiece of our operations. I ask now that each and every one of you take this fact fully to heart and exert your utmost to destroy the Federation forces as soon as possible, and thus gain honor for the Principality of Zeon. May you and your families prosper. Death to our enemies." In the midst of Giran's speech, Degenzabi stood up and left. By the time the Pegasus II and its 5 mobile suits had finished practicing their combat formation flight and returned to the LH Moon base, it was already past 7 o'clock meantime. Several Salamis-class cruisers were moored in the base docking bay, and preparations for the upcoming mission were proceeding at a feverish pitch. Before leaving the bridge, Amuro loosened his pilot suit and turned to Brighton, the captain's seat. "When do we ship out next, Skipper?" he asked. "How the hell should I know? You think they'd tell me? All I know is we have to perform all pre-flight maintenance within 28 hours. And we take off right after that? Your stuff?" "Just 1 duffel bag, that's all." "Probably." A duffel bag was military slang for a waterproof denim sack that held a single standard-issue military uniform. It was an anachronistic term in the space age, but still popular, a holdover from the naval traditions of a bygone era. Turning to Petty Officer Salamas, Bright said, "He doesn't seem to know anything about this place. Show him to his quarters." "Yes, sir," she replied. She was engrossed in her work at the communications console, and she quickly told him, "Give me 2 or 3 minutes, okay?" Amuro watched Bright monitor the pre-flight checks on the bridge displays and bark his orders throughout the new ship. He couldn't help thinking how much things had changed and how fast. The bridge was bustling with activity and alive with a new energy. Was it because many of the crew members were potential new types? There was no way of knowing for certain, but there was a palpably different, though intangible, aura about them. It was unlike the emotive communion he had sensed with Lala's son, and for a moment he wondered if the difference was simply because he was not properly attuned to them, but he soon decided otherwise. There was something clear, soft, even reassuring in the atmosphere. It was a peaceful feeling, almost like home. There was no point dwelling on the reasons. Had it not been wartime, with all its attendant tensions, he would have abandoned himself to the sensation and been lulled into a deep and restful sleep. Rear of the bridge, he followed, watching. She was a year or two older than he was, but a tad shorter. As usual, he admired her pretty blonde hair. When they reached the elevator that would lead them out to the docking bay, he asked, "Well, have you finally gotten used to life on ship?" "Why, yes, thank you," she replied. "At least I don't get in everyone's way anymore. And by the way, I'm glad you made it back okay, Ensign." "Whoa, please. Let's cut out the rank. You'll embarrass me." Seeing his obvious confusion, she said, "Well, I'm a petty officer second class, you're an ensign. This is the military, isn't it?" "Well, yes. But damn it, don't be too hard on me, Sayla. Just between the two of us then, what should I call you, Ensign?" Unable to answer properly, he began to grind his teeth. It was weird. Here he was, a seasoned combat veteran. Somehow he had assumed that would help him relate to her on a more equal, adult basis, but so much for that idea. He was stammering away, another naive delusion shattered. He fell silent. 20 seconds later, the elevator stopped at the ship's upper deck, and the instant the door opened, they were enveloped in a cacophony of sound. They ought to let the air out of the hangars when they do pre-flight maintenance and supply operations, Amuro thought reflexively. The upper deck was at the base of the ship's bridge, and from it one could look out the open hatches of the starboard and port leg-like extremities. The hangars of the LH docking bay were on 2 staggered levels, and on the lower one, a transport ship that had moored was busy unloading ammunition and weaponry. On the upper level, work crews Amuro had never seen before were engaged in a flurry of activity and were clearly the source of most of the noise. They were already welding parts of the Pegasus to 2 deck, and even stripping off parts of its armor. Amuro tried to cross over to the mooring pier but tripped on a ladder and grumbled despite himself at an officer in front of him holding a transceiver. "What the hell's going on? What's the matter? The repairs bother you?" The officer turned around and Amuro had to stifle a gasp. It was Matilda Ajan, the pretty junior-grade lieutenant from the 28th Supply Corps, whom he had met once before on Luna II. "Ensign," she said, as surprised as he was, as when they had first met, he noted her auburn hair. It was a shame she kept it so short. "Never mind, Ensign. Ensign Amuro Ray, isn't it? I remember you. Lieutenant Woody Malden's in charge of the repairs, and you can trust him 100%. He says the Pegasus needs a more consistent thickness of armor plating." "Lieutenant Woody Malden? An officer from the armory." She pointed with her chin in the direction of an officer-engineer with a powerful physique, who turned around as if on cue. Amuro silently mouthed the name Woody, but couldn't think of anything to say. The timing between Matilda and Woody could have been accidental, but he was sure it was not. The officer had responded in a special way to her. He was a handsome man with heavy eyebrows and full lips, twinkling eyes, and an active demeanor, exactly the type he suspected Matilda would go for. And he was in a unit with which she would naturally have a lot of contact. Amuro heard a slight tremble in Matilda's voice and turned away from the pair in embarrassment. "Some problem?" Woody asked. "No, sir," Amuro fired back. "Just an opinion stated without knowing the facts. I'm sure the Pegasus is in good hands." He saluted and jumped off the ladder toward the pier itself. "Amuro," Sayla called out after him as he sailed through the low-gravity air. When the concrete surface of the pier filled his vision, Amuro flexed his knees and landed. To his surprise, Sayla landed beside him only seconds later. "Amuro, what are you doing?" she cried, regretting her choice of words before she had completed the sentence. She felt flustered herself. He sensed her emotion, but he was not ready to think about its implications. He was still preoccupied with Matilda Ajan and the sudden realization that she was in love with someone. He had no idea why it bothered him. He didn't have a crush on her or anything like that, he told himself, although he knew his reactions spoke otherwise. He was feeling self-critical, and it occurred to him that he was simply too immature and inexperienced around women. Just having a woman like Sayla or Matilda stand in front of him was enough to overload his brain and paralyze him. He could never compare himself favorably with Woody, for example. He knew that if Matilda so much as tossed her auburn hair and moved toward Woody, the officer would grab her right away. It made him feel all the more humiliated. "Amuro," Selah said, grabbing his left arm. "What?" he said, noticing her blonde hair again. She was so different from Matilda. "That building over there, that's the quarters you've been assigned to," she said with an official tone. Most men would have detected a tinge of jealousy in her words, but Amuro was oblivious to it. She helped him check into the facility, where he was assigned his private quarters. As an ensign, he was on a different floor than Selah, who was housed with the junior officers. Before stepping into the elevator to go to his room, he turned to her and asked, "Will you join me for dinner tonight? But, Amuro, you're probably busy and tired, right?" No. Heck, besides, I don't get the chance to eat with you very often. I'd be honored if you'd join me." When she nodded an okay, he said, "I'll see you in 15 minutes, and proceeded up to his room. He showered and changed and wished he had time to polish his shoes. Something about the way she had agreed to join him seemed a little vague, and it bothered him. Selah showed up a few minutes late, apologizing and looking different. To his surprise, she had put on a touch of lipstick. Their eyes met, and he realized she really had been looking forward to their date, but he also recognized something in her that did remind him of Lala. Perhaps she really was a new type. There was only one reason he suspected this. There was something in her eyes he had never noticed before, something subjective, something that could not be explained logically. It was as if she had another aura about her, one darker, more urgent. He knew it wasn't malevolent, but whatever it was, Selah seemed different. Perhaps he had been blind all along, blinded by his impression of her as the bungler on ship, blinded by the childlike interest he had had in her ever since Side 7. He knew she had managed to lead the Pegasus survivors to safety before Texas had blown up. He knew that whatever image he had had of her in the past, it was time to revise it. "Something the matter, Amuro?" she asked, looking at him oddly. "Nothing. He started to say something but stopped. The most important thing at this point was just to sit down and calm down, but he was in a self-service dining room, with all the bothersome procedures it always entailed. "Congratulations on your escape from Texas," he said as they started eating. "I heard all about how the Pegasus was put out of action. I could feel the enemy," she said hesitatingly. "It felt like a powerful force, and I knew the whole crew would be in danger, so I left to locate an escape route from the colony." Wow. She was feeding him a half-lie. But it was true that after parting with her brother Shar Aznable, she had worked feverishly to help rescue the crew of the doomed Pegasus. In fact, as some of the crew members had later told Amuro, they had heard her voice mysteriously come out of nowhere. "Did you know where the crew were when the ship finally went down?" "No. I didn't know where they were, but they apparently knew where I was. See, you must be a new type. I can't believe it myself." "Do you really think this is the way new type powers appear in people?" "I did some research on new types when I was on Side 6, Selah, and they're not supposed to be able to do anything supernatural. But if many can do what you did, I think the scientists will have to rethink the whole concept. Don't read too much into what I did. The new types that Zeon Zum Daikun spoke of were supposed to symbolize something much more universal, something that applied to all mankind. So, it wasn't supposed to be someone who dashes off on a whim like me." She put her fork down on the table. "You know what? It's a one-sided affair for me." "A one-sided affair? What on earth did she mean?" His ears immediately pricked up. Was she trying to tell him she was in love with someone? "I have an older brother, Amuro. Someone I haven't seen for years and years. I sort of have a complex about the whole thing. Sometimes I have something like a seizure when I'm near him. I'm sorry, I know this all sounds weird." "An older brother? A seizure?" Amuro was perplexed. What in heaven's name was she talking about? What did this have to do with their discussion of new types? It's like something suddenly goes off in my mind sometimes. Maybe in this case it helped me save the others. "Selah, when you say seizure, do you mean the sort of thing that might conceivably happen between two new types if, say, their minds were on the same wavelength?" The sort of thing that might suddenly expand their consciousness, even project it? Amuro chose his words carefully, thinking of Lala-san. "You've quite a way with words, Ensign," she said. Then she looked into his eyes and added, "And you may be right." "Think so?" "Yes. I know you use the word seizure, but I think you're really referring to a special ability, something that's dormant until activated by a sudden stimulus, right?" "Right. It's sort of like when—" Sayla blanched. "Forgive me," he quickly added. "Just my imagination, sensed in Shiraznable." But it was easy to make a logical connection after the fact. He waited for her to say something. "As long as we're on this track," she continued haltingly, "you want to know something else? Char's real name is Kasval Daikun, my real name is Artasia Daikun, and we're the children of Zion Zum Daikun. Sayla Mas is the name I took after my brother and I fled from the Principality of Zion to Earth. Well, how's that for a surprise?" Amuro was stunned. He glanced around the room, and his nervous system went on 360-degree alert. If anyone overheard their conversation, there would be hell to pay. "This is not the place for that sort of talk, Sayla," he cautioned. "Maybe I made it all up," she countered with a weak smile. "Sayla, I honestly don't know if you did or not, but to me it's got to be real. It's the only way I can understand what I've been sensing in you. You think we're kindred spirits, Amuro?" "For lack of a better word, yes. I've felt the same way with Char, with Lala, and even Cusco with Al." "Lala? Cusco Al? Who are they?" "They're Xeon new types. I had to fight Lala on Texas, and Cusco Al's probably the next one I'll face. I got to know her through the intelligence agency on Side 6. She's a new type." "So Xeon's really deploying new types in combat?" "Right," Amuro groaned. While the Federation still thinks there's some sort of joke, Kai Shiden suddenly entered the dining room with several mechamen and occupied the tables in a corner. "Yo, Ensign Amuro," he called out. "Having a good time, eh? And the petty officer? How about a date with me tonight, sweetie?" "Too bad, Mr. Kai," Sayla bantered back, her clear voice echoing through the dining hall. "I've already got one ensign here to keep me company, and that's enough." Amuro's jaw dropped in amazement. As he stared at her in embarrassment, Kai's table erupted in laughter and wolf whistles. "Hey, Don Juan, the Irresistible," someone said in his direction. "It's not fair. You join our new ship late and then walk off with one of our prize waves. What have you got to say for yourself?" In the midst of the teasing, Sayla turned to Amuro and joked. "Don't make me lose face now," she said. "Go along with it and make it up to them later. You know, buy them a drink or take them out to dinner." "Me?" Amuro gulped. "Sure, you are irresistible." Something about the way she said it bothered Amuro. It reminded him of Cusco Al, and just when he thought of Cusco, the memory of Fraubo washed over him. When he looked at Sayla again, she was already standing up to leave. "I think it's a little dangerous to write off the Supreme Commander as a mere fanatic," Lieutenant Shaliabul whispered to Char Aznable. "He does have some leadership qualities." The two men, along with Cusco Al, had gathered in an officer's music listening room on a Baoku. It was soundproofed, but they kept their voices low anyway. "Ah, I agree," Char said. "We can't overlook the fact that there is genuine support in Xi'an for the dictatorship." Chalia nodded in agreement, but seemed to be pondering something. Char was beginning to rethink his opinion of the lieutenant, a new type candidate who had arrived on a Baoku only 6 hours earlier. He was of medium build and height, not the type that stood out in a crowd. But there was something about the way he carried himself, and the slightly hollowed look in his cheeks that spoke of incredible endurance. His resume said he was 28, yet he looked far older. He seemed awfully cautious, but that was probably an important quality for someone in charge of the Jupiter transports. "I'd say the real tragedy of our Supreme Commander," Cusco interjected, "is that his ambition exceeds his ability, wouldn't you?" Looked as though the rather fashionable Xeon officers' uniforms had been specifically designed for her. But Char was unimpressed. There was something about her that always irritated him. He had no problem with women in the force acting a little differently from the men. There was certainly no need for them to be exactly the same, but Cusco tended to ignore even the basic protocols of military hierarchy. And it was not just because she was something of a free spirit. Her parents had come from some place on Earth called Argentina but had divorced. She had moved to Side 3 as part of the forced emigration program to the space colonies. There was something self-destructive about her. "Cusco," Char cautioned. "We have to be careful not to speculate too much on his character." He wanted to put her in her place, but instead her eyes flashed in defiance. "We've got to keep track of what he's doing," he continued, "and collect more hard data on him. But we have to be careful. One wrong move, and the people who are supposed to be our allies will do us in." He added the last statement because he feared more than anything else that she would leak word of their conversation to the wrong party. It seemed to work, for she fell silent. "I may not be subordinate to Caecilia forever," he continued, "but for now remember that we're under the command of Her Excellency, and that without her we're doomed. Understand?" Chalia softly asked, "You'll follow her as long as it fits in with your personal plans. Is that correct, sir?" "Let's be blunt," Char said. "I'll say yes, and you'll believe me, right?" "Why are men always so power-hungry?" Cusco interjected again. "Be careful," Char cautioned her. "We didn't invite you in on this discussion." "Maybe," she retorted with a laugh. "But you haven't asked me to leave either, and I know why. Because you'd feel guilty if you did, right?" "No, we're letting you stay because you're a new type and we've got no choice. But there's no time to argue that point. There's something very important I've still got to confirm with Chalia." "Go ahead. You've already said enough to make me a co-conspirator." To Char's surprise, Chalia laughed and said, "She's right, Commander. I need some sort of guarantee from you," Char said to Chalia. "Since there's a strong possibility that you may represent Girin's interest in this, how much can I trust you?" He was an idealist, Chalia. An utterly new meaning. Perhaps because the military authorities of the Principality of Zeon were so embroiled in war, they were the first to interpret it in their own way, latching on to the notion that new types could be used for a more specific, immediate purpose, as humans with paranormal powers, as pilots with prescience, as weapons of war. "I greatly admired Zeon Daikun," Chalia said. "It's a shame he didn't survive long enough to become more than just a revolutionary propagandist and visionary. He might have become the type of politician we really need today." "No one can be everything," Char said. "Besides, politicians with too much personal ambition make me nervous." "True. That sort of thing can shorten a person's life. And if you always have a hidden agenda, people start to distrust you too." Char's hands suddenly turned clammy. There was no way Chalia could possibly know his real identity, but he might have sensed something. His words were getting close to the danger zone. He was, without a doubt, a man with considerable intuition. Char replied as tactfully as possible. "I may outrank you, Chalia, but you're older than I am and more experienced. I think I have a lot to learn from you." He didn't like saying it in front of Cusco Al, and it made him resent her presence all the more. Even before meeting Chalia, he had noted an obstinate masculine pride in himself. Cusco spoke up as if sensing what the two men were thinking. "I know I probably bug both of you, but you won't get much double talk from me. Unlike you men, there's no hidden agenda in this girl." She meant to be sarcastic, but her words did not quite have the intended effect. "All well and good," Char said icily, "but put your curiosity on hold. You know what it did to the cat, right? Sometimes it's better to be in the dark about these things. Sometimes it's dangerous to hook up with people in a situation like this. Be realistic about what you're getting into and conduct yourself in as responsible a fashion as possible." She replied petulantly. "I can hardly change my basic personality, can I? In any case, I wouldn't want to. I like the way I am, thank you." "In that case," Chalia said, "you have to accept us the way we are too, and be a good girl and occasionally leave the room. Frankly, I prefer women who don't pretend to be so intelligent." "Lieutenant," Cusco exclaimed. Char could not help smirking. Chalia was capable of a more barbed tongue than he would have ever imagined. "Well, if that's the way you feel, why'd you say all that stuff in front of me?" "You gave the answer earlier. We set you up as a co-conspirator." Sharaznable accepted Chalia Bull, the spy sent by Supreme Commander Girin, as a partner in his plans. In the future, he's going to destroy Cecilia Zabi and eventually the Supreme Commander himself. You both must be dreaming. If you think so, keep your nose out of it, Shar said. This is our business. The fact that Chaliabul came as Jiren's spy to find out what Krishi is up to, the fact of my plotting. Forget everything you heard. Understand? Cusco kicked off the floor and left the room, slamming the door behind her. Chalia turned. Sounds fine. To tell the truth, I'm not even sure myself why I have such trouble getting along with her. That's just the way people are, Commander. You said it earlier. No one can be everything to everyone. The two men turned off the lights and left the listening room. From outside the window, the moonlight streamed inside. Earth was out of sight. It was a good thing women had such warm, smooth skin, Amuro thought, as he spread his right hand over the gentle mound of Sayla's breast. Then he remembered what someone had once told him, that sleeping people have nightmares if something weighs upon their chests, and removed his hand, reluctantly letting it drift down to her side. His eyes lingered on the gentle shape of her breasts and the delicate outline of her nipples. It was a violation of military regulations for a woman to be in a male officer's quarters at night, but it happened all the time and was never punished anymore. Nearly 30% of the Federation forces were now waves, and liaisons were overlooked as long as the following basic guidelines were observed. Trainees could not be involved. The interaction could not be during a time of combat and had to take place in a private room, and everyone had to be in his or her original assigned quarters for lights out and reveal. The last rule was one of the reasons that in some quarters there was a considerable amount of coming and going 10 minutes after the official lights out time. Attitudes towards sex had changed radically in the space age, but most people still looked askance at those who engaged in promiscuous activity. Inappropriate behavior often resulted in harsh criticism from fellow crew members, coupled with accusations of being a playboy or playgirl, terms with highly negative overtones. When Sayla had first entered his room, she had grinned and said, I passed Mira on the way here, but she doesn't suspect anything. Some of our pals back there in the dining hall probably feel jilted, though, so don't forget to be nice to them. Oh, that was all Amuro had managed to say. After that, he remembered little. She had received him, and he had felt vaguely dissatisfied after it was all over. Then she had said with a giggle, If I'm ever assigned a private room, you can come visit me. That had been 10 minutes earlier. Now he could tell by her breathing that she was fast asleep. It was funny. He had first thought she had come to him specifically to talk about Shar Aznable, but to his surprise, it seemed she had just come to sleep with him. She had wrapped him in her exquisitely long limbs and hadn't mentioned her brother's name once. There was definitely something unnerving about the ways of women, he thought, wondering if Fraba was the same way. Then the fatigue from a long day caught up with him, and he fell asleep in the warmth of Sayla's body, marveling at how complex humans were. He awoke abruptly to the sound of Sayla sobbing quietly, her face buried in a pillow and her shoulders shaking. Sayla, what is it? He asked. Amuro, she sobbed almost inaudibly. I'm sorry. He gingerly placed his hand on her back and, as she kept weeping, began gently massaging her. Then, to his surprise, she suddenly rolled over, jumped out of bed, and ran to the shower. It happened so fast, he only saw her white limbs flash for a second in the darkness. He roused himself, shocked. From the shower, he could hear the water blasting her skin. He placed his hand on the impression her body had left on the bed and felt the residual warmth. He swore softly and bit his thumbnail. 10 minutes later, the sound of the shower stopped. The door to the bathroom opened, and Sayla emerged, a bath towel wrapped around her torso. She walked straight over to him and announced, Well, think I'm pretty? Playing God. I'd rather see him dead. I don't kill people for personal reasons, he replied, his voice rising in anger. Is this why you slept with me? No, she moaned softly. It doesn't have anything to do with it. Listen, Sayla, you're a complicated person. I've known you as the young blonde on Side 7, as the Pegasus's communications officer, and now even as Artesia, child of the late Zion Zum Daikun. But to me, there's only one real Sayla. You're always Sayla, and I don't like the Sayla I see now. I'm sorry, Amuro, but I almost never have a chance to talk to you, so when I'm with you like this, everything gets mixed up and you wind up misunderstanding me. It's not the way you think it is. Maybe not. Maybe I'll never meet Char in combat again. Who knows? I may be killed first. Either way, what you just said to me is taboo. Amuro, I don't think you can understand because you've never had a brother you really love. I hope I never love anyone so much I want them dead. He suddenly felt thirsty and stood up and walked to the bathroom to get a drink. He was stark naked, but he didn't care. He wished Sayla would leave and decided to kill some time by taking a shower. But even afterward, he could sense she was still in the room. Sure enough, when he emerged, she was wrapped in a blanket on his bed, lying face up, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. "I'm sorry," she said. "Let's go back to sleep." He thought about sleeping alone on the sofa in the room, but her warm body was too tempting, and besides, it was his room and his bed. He lay down beside her, and before he slipped into sleep, he felt her hand reach out and gently touch his waist.